President Cyril Ramaphosa set to deliver the annual State of the Nation address this evening.
Now, this year's theme is following up on our commitments, making your future work better.
The address, of course, affords the President that opportunity to speak to the nation about the general state of the country.
Well, it also allows for reflection on a wide range of political, economic and social issues. Our colleague Thulasizwe Similane is at Parliament for us this morning. Thulas, a very good morning to you. And like we say, as the countdown begins, it's about 12 hours till we hear from the President, if he is on time, which he most always is. So what are the expectations? What are we wanting to hear from him today?
Well, Yuveka, you'll remember how extraordinary the week was last year when President Ramaphosa delivered his inaugural State of the Nation address. It's a week where we started the week with one president and ended the week with a completely different president. And also we faced the uncertainty of when exactly was this State of the Nation address going to be delivered. It's tradition that it's delivered on the first Thursday evening of the evening of the first Thursday in February. But last year it was that extraordinary with the processes in the ANC to recall and get the resignation of former President Jacob Zuma. So a lot has happened since then. The expectation is for President Ramaphosa to report back on the undertakings and promises that he made last year, particularly as they relate to issues to do with youth employment, the youth employment service that he said would be launched. It was launched, but how many jobs has it created? Because the promise was that there was going to be 1 million opportunities for young people to be employed and be paid over a period of the next 3 years. So how far has that gone? The issue of creating 270,000 jobs over a period of time. I think it's every year coming out of the Jobs Summit as well as the Investment Summit. How far are we in as far as delivering on those promises? So it's certainly where the eyes will be, but the eyes of the opposition will be on President Cyril Ramaphosa himself. Last year, there was a sense of a benefit of the doubt approach that said, let's give him the benefit of the doubt. We wish you well if you are going to do things differently from your predecessor, Jacob Zuma. But this time around, it does seem that President Ramaphosa is under pressure. The DA has been putting pressure on this issue of the 500,000 rand that we are told went to the campaign for President Ramaphosa to become the president of the ANC. The ANC believes, certainly if you go by the explanation of Jackson Mthembu, the chief whip of the ANC, they believe his explanation, but the opposition not buying it as much, including, of course, the EFF, who have said that they could potentially want to ask questions of the president about this issue. Not to mention, of course, the revelations that have been coming out about Busasa, the company at the center of this 500,000 rand, and how they related and interacted with some people who serve in higher echelons within the ANC, but also here in Parliament, Vincent Smith, and also within the cabinet of President Ramaphosa.
All right, Thulas, and I suppose then we will be watching, yes, those promises that checking back, and Dan's going to have a longer discussion about what those promises were, the 4 big ones, and whether he will deliver. And I want to ask you, do we think with everything going on with state capture and Bosasa and what we've seen, that the opposition is going to let the president get on with business today?
Well, it's hard to tell. It's hard to predict. Previously, Yuveka, I could have given you a straight-up answer because, I mean, you know, the EFF with the previous president, former President Jacob Zuma, they had labeled him a constitutional delinquent. And basically, their approach was that we don't let this delinquent speak without getting him to answer questions on various issues that would be up in the air at various points in time. And it became almost an annual ritual that we knew. You sort of could predict that, you know, the occasion starts very well. We get inside and we're seated there, and the speaker calls on the president to address the nation, and hardly a minute into it, you would hear those words, Madam Speaker, on a point of order, and you know it starts from there. And, you know, you'll remember the occasions where you would have members of the opposition being chucked out of the National Assembly by parliamentary security, and also you would have the DA sort of walking out in protest. In fact, one of the State of the Nation addresses, many people quipped at the time that it resembled a caucus meeting of the ANC, in that many of the opposition members had left by the time former President Jacob Zuma spoke. But this time around, it's a bit hard to tell whether there'll be disruption in that sense that we became used to in the last 5 years. Certainly, the opposition not happy with President Ramaphosa on a number of fronts. One, the issue of the 500,000 rand, on which he gave two different explanations.
Okay, we seem to have a bit of a glitch there in our connection to Thulasizwe Simelane, but we do get the gist of what is expected. What are the expectations? Will the president actually meet those expectations?
Yeah, that 500,000 rand he was referring to is that the Busasa issue that has been building. A president being asked in Parliament about that issue and answering in one way, and a few days later answering in a different way. And oppositions want to know the truth, according to them. Now, partner, in the run-up to the State of the Nation address this evening, Africa Check has been probing whether President Ramaphosa has kept the promises he made to South Africa this time last year. Senior researcher at Africa Check, Kate Wilkinson, is joining us now in the studio. Morning, Kate, and thank you very much. I see that if we went through every promise that was made, we'll be here, I guess, for a long time. But you went and chose two promises. Just to share with our viewers, what's the rationale for you in trying to Africa check these things?
So we've looked at 4 promises, which are on our website, and today we're looking at 2. But what people often don't quite get is that in order to check a promise and actually stamp whether it's been kept or broken, it needs to have 2 things. It needs to have a time frame, and it needs to have an action which can be measured in some way. And what we often see in speeches and events like this is commitments to increase or to strengthen our commitment, to make sure that programs are enacted to enhance things. It's lots of politician talk and speak, and sometimes it's quite hard to actually measure if those things have been done. So what we've done is taken four promises that can't be wiggled out of. We have a date, we have an action that can be measured, and we've looked at whether they've been
now for the
kept.
purpose of Morning News today here on ENC, we're going to focus on 2 of those promises, although you've done 4 promises, as my partner Yuveka referred to earlier. The first promise, I think we should start with, let's just get on with it, is about the Accelerated Schools Infrastructure Delivery Initiative Program, okay? Before you tell us how that promise has been met or not met, let's take a listen to what President Cyril Ramaphosa said at his State of the Nation address last year, 2018, when he made that promise.
The Accelerated Schools Infrastructure Delivery Initiative, ACIDI, program continues to deliver modern facilities to our schools, particularly in the rural areas and underprivileged urban areas across the length and the breadth of our country, with at least 187 schools being completed to date. The program will complete all outstanding projects by the end of the next financial year.
Okay. Now, this program, ACIDI, he promised last year, will complete, and I quote, we've just heard him, all outstanding projects by the end of the next financial year. And we're close enough to the end of that financial year. So what have you found when you checked this?
So here's an example of something that is very easy to check because it's tangible. We have a time frame. By next month, by the end of next March, the President promised that all of these outstanding projects would be completed. And we can go to data which is released by the Department of Basic Education, which is rolling out this program, and we can see that this promise hasn't been met. And if you actually go through the archives of promises made by a number of politicians over the years, you'll see that this is an annual promise that we see.
Yeah, and we've got some numbers of that.
So this program, ACIDI, was actually rolled out in 2011, and when it was first started, it identified 496 inappropriate structures, and these were schools which had dangerous conditions. They're mud schools, they're schools made out of planks, they're schools where it actually isn't safe for children to go and learn every single day.
So 496 schools were identified as inappropriate in 2011, and the program has been rolling since then.
Absolutely, and it's been terribly delayed. It was meant to be completed by March 2014, so we're already 5 5 years late, and to date, just over 200 schools have been completed.
And now the President said all of that should have been done by next month, but so far, from what we can see and hear what you have fact-checked, we will not meet that promise.
Absolutely not. And if you look at the planning documents from the department, we see that they actually plan for a number of years to continue building these schools. In 2019-20, they plan to build another 17 schools. The following year, they plan to build another 15. So we're not going to see these schools completed next month, probably not within the next few years. And if we go all the way back to 2004, so that's 15 years ago, we had then President Mbeki at his State of the Nation address that year promising that those schools would be completed in that financial year.
So ASIDI is not being delivered, the promise not met, the facts speak for themselves. Okay, another promise that was made was about a jobs summit. That's what President Cyril Ramaphosa promised last year when he delivered his inaugural State of the Nation address. Let's take a listen at how he positioned that promise.
We are going to embark on a number of measures to address the unemployment challenge. One of the initiatives we will embark on is to convene a job summit within the next few months to align the efforts of every sector and every stakeholder behind the imperative of job creation. Now, this is a response to a number of stakeholders in the labor movement and business who have said to us as government, what is needed to immediately and urgently address the challenge of jobs is to have a job summit where many South Africans will put their heads together and come up with solutions. The summit will look at what we need to do to ensure that our economy grows and becomes more productive, that companies invest on a far greater scale, and that workers are better equipped, and that our economic infrastructure is also expanded.
The President is speaking at his inaugural State of the Nation address 2018. And Kate, Africa checked this, and what did you find?
We found that he kept his promise, at least with regards to holding the summit. So the speech was delivered in February of last year, and he committed to, within the next few months, hold the job summit. And it was, in fact, held on the 4th and 5th of October that year. So in that regard, the promise is kept. The grander goals, the ambitions to solve the job situation in South Africa probably require more analysis and interrogation. But with this, the President kept his word.
Yeah, you promised to hold a summit, you hold it, and then, of course, the implementation, especially with the jobs issue, and when we know in terms of unemployment figures in the country, one wonders how progress will that be made. And maybe today he might refer to part of that progress. Okay, those are the two of the four promises that Africa Check has been focusing on from 2018 SONA ahead of 2019 SONA this evening. So we've seen on the ASIDI one, that's the Accelerated Schools Infrastructure Delivery Initiative, far from being met. The promise is not going to be met. Job Summit is a tick. It has been done, but the question remains whether or not jobs are now being created. Okay, you also checked some of the claims. As you said, politicians make these statements, they make these vague claims. There's a claim that was made about early childhood development. What have you found about that claim?
So every State of the Nation address, we live fact check it. So tonight, like last year, we'll be listening to the speech, we'll be scribbling down what the President says, and then we'll be checking it against the most recent data and seeing whether it's correct or incorrect. And last year, the President mentioned a number, and he was talking about the number of children who are enrolled in early childhood development facilities in the country, and he put it at nearly 1 million. But this isn't in line with even government data and what their research suggests. If we look at the most recent data we have, for example, from 2016, from our community survey, from our general household survey, we see that close to 2.4 million children are actually in early childhood development facilities.
So he mentioned 1 million. But you found from checking the facts, it's actually 2.5 million.
Yes, and this is actually quite concerning because there's widespread underestimations of the number of children who are in ECD facilities. And this has a few implications. One, government needs to be planning and budgeting for these children. And if they only think they have half the children, they're only going to get half the budget and half the plans. Secondly, ECD enrollment is often used as a metric or an indicator globally of a country's commitment to education and how it prioritizes education. And if this is the message that our president is sending out to the world, it's not in line and in sync with the reality on the ground.
Okay, interesting. Now, second claim that you've checked was about the number of work opportunities created by the government's public employment programs. He referred to that in his State of the Nation address last year. What have you found?
Absolutely. So the President stated that since the start of the current Parliament, 3.2 million work opportunities had been created. And if you go back and you look from the start of 2014-15, which aligns with the term of government that we're coming to an end to now, and you look at the most recent available data that the President would have had access to, we see that he is completely correct. According to the expanded public works program, indeed 3.2 million work opportunities were created. But there are a few things to take into account. First of all, these aren't permanent positions. They are part-time. They normally last about a few months, and they're meant to give people that first opportunity to get some work experience and get a leg up onto the job ladder. And secondly, people can do a number of these work opportunities. So while 3.2 work opportunities may have been delivered, this doesn't necessarily mean that an equal number of people have benefited from the program.
Okay, I know you're not dealing with the other two promises here. Thank you very much for the claims. But I mean, if I was a viewer and I've heard Kate from Africa Check saying we were looking at 4 promises, I know you're dealing with the other 2 elsewhere on ENCA. Without getting into details, what are the other 2?
No, definitely, I can speak to them. So we looked at another commitment, which was to roll out the youth employment scheme, which sees corporates coming to the table and committing work opportunities or work experiences for youth. And that was launched. It was actually launched the following month after the speech. And we have seen it happen, so that's a tick for the President. Although just in the last few days we've seen a bit of commentary and pushback on the fact that the program doesn't seem to be getting off to the start that many had hoped. It does plan to provide 1 million work experiences over 3 years, but just 6,000 have been committed by corporates so far. So
and then the other promise, very quickly, the other one?
So the other promise was to enroll an additional 2 million people on ARV treatment by December 2020. So we can only really check in, and we've rated that this is in the works. Okay. It seems like people are, as we've seen over the years, being enrolled in the program, but the promise isn't quite in line with the Departments of Health planning. It seems that the promise may be a bit ambitious, but we'll keep checking in over the months and years and see whether it's actually kept.
I was just very curious to know about the other 2 promises. Thank you very much, Kate, for checking those things for our senior researcher at Africa Check Kate Wilkinson. We've seen the 2 promises that were made. We've gone through them, and we'll hear more promises, I am sure.